It's been 15 years now since Zoey 101 ended, and just now we got the continuation. If you're like me, you grew up watching this heartfelt teen show about this group of friends. To me, Zoey 101 always stood out compared to the other Dan Schneider shows like iCarly and Victorious. There was a more relaxed approach to the comedy, notably without a laugh track. The characters felt more fleshed out, and the show made you feel like you lived at PCA with this group of friends. Perhaps most importantly, the show had a story, one that felt really relatable over a period of 4 school years. I also want to mention how likable the ensemble of characters was in this friend group. While the focus was always on Zoey, her friends were always the highlight. Chase's charisma, Quinn's quirkiness, Lola's vogue, Michael's humor, Nicole's passion, Logan's confidence. Hanging out with them through the screen was just always the highlight. So what does this look like 15 years later, with a story in new hands, with a fractured cast, and an endless off-screen controversy? Well, let's talk about it. First, I'd like to share my experience with the movie and the show and how I approached it. I can say openly that growing up, my favorite shows were the Dan Schneider shows on Nickelodeon, especially iCarly, Drake and Josh, Victorious, and Zoey 101. Of course, at the time, I had no idea who Dan Schneider was, or for that matter, anything behind the scenes. I don't even think I knew what the actors were called. And in terms of the controversy, I think I'm going to avoid getting into that here. It's a complicated, strangely open-ended case that makes talking about it here feel void. On this channel, I've always focused more on the fictional narratives of these shows, and so I'll leave the non-fiction for someone who's more appropriately versed in the information. But so as a fan of the original Zoey 101, I was excited to revisit one of my favorite childhood shows. It's rare you get to do that as an adult. Starting now with the movie, my interpretation is that they tried to make it a standalone movie, but it just doesn't work. I almost felt like they overdid the story element here. So much so that we only got a few lines from some of our favorite characters like Michael. Like we didn't see a single scene between Michael and Chase, my favorite pairing in the original. Regardless, getting 90 minutes worth of characters we loved as kids, now all grown up like us, it's entertaining. Speaking of, let's go over the things this movie does right, the good. First of all, I love that Quinn and Logan are still together after all these years. The two of them shine in this movie. Quinn and Logan's personalities have clearly rubbed off on each other over the years, and the two of them have a fun, now matured relationship, and they both seemingly have achieved their life goals. They also show that behind every perfect couple, there are still imperfections. I really feel they did these characters right. Speaking of the characters in the movie, one of the absolute highlights, completely unexpectedly, is Todd, or Hugo, the actor Zoey hires to play her stunning boyfriend. Dean Gayer nails the tone of this form of comedy, and his intended side story somehow becomes the most interesting storyline in the movie. Usually these side characters in reboots are cheap and unlikable, but I found myself rooting for him, rather than Chase, which seems like an impossible thought. His Malibu murder plot might also strangely be the most sequel-demanding part of this story. Another element in this movie which left me quite surprised was the visual production quality. The movie is really well shot and the lighting makes the whole movie pop. It's really vibrant and the techmates keep that Dan Schneider futuristic vibe. This element makes the movie feel like a movie. It's more important than you might think. The soundtrack of the movie is hit or miss, but one of my favorite parts of the movie is when Zoey and Chase are stuck in the car and Don't Speak starts playing. The opening lines for the song perfectly describe their state and made me smile. It was clever. Now let's talk about the bad. So what holds this movie back? I can start with the painful first quarter of the movie, where we follow Zoey's fairly uninteresting situation, and I don't think it's even badly executed story-wise, but when you use 60% of the runtime on the most uninteresting character which had the least personality in the original show, this is what you get. Zoey shined as a voice amongst her friends, but on her own, she's boring. We cut back to Zoey's job all the time, but I don't think anyone was like, yay, back to Zoey's job. Please, show us the friend group, the wedding, the stories, not this fake Love Island. Also, it was so painful to watch Zoey watching a live stream while her supposed best friend is getting married right in front of her. Like, I could go on and on. Like, how terrible of a person is she for just leaving Chase alone in Hawaii? but in summation, Zoey isn't likable in this movie, and neither is taking time away from the rest of our returning cast. I feel like Hugo spent more time with them than Zoey did, which might not be such a bad thing after all, to be honest. That frustrates me, but this next one makes me burn. The girls get time and some bachelorette activity and conversation, but the guys, Mark, Logan, Michael, and Chase, they hardly interact. Like I mentioned before, my favorite relationship in the original is Michael and Chase, one of the best TV friendships ever seen. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they have a single one-to-one in the whole movie. What the... Michael is the fan favorite. Don't silence him, he's drippin'. Things like this make me think the writers entirely misunderstood the original. Now, I think it was about time for Chase and Zoey to finally be together. It's the product of the original. I'm sure it's tricky to write a storyline for these two in 90 minutes. Their relationship was crafted carefully over 4 years in the original, and I'm not going to complain too much here. The two were meant for each other, but their love reconnection was surely rushed. While this is the right outcome, I can't help but think that this movie slightly stains their special relationship from the original. Now, of course we didn't get Dustin, Lola, Nicole, or Dana in this movie, but we did get Stacy, who I never feel like should be written as a main character. Her getting more time than Michael is a crime. This was probably intentional, and maybe she is slated to be a little villain in the movie, but she was quite annoying and unlikable to me, and she didn't make me laugh either. Last little negative I'd like to add, I don't like how this movie ignores things that are meant to be canon, like the famous time capsule clip created in 2015 by Dan Schneider himself, where Chase and Michael reconnect, and Chase goes to find Zoey, clearly still obsessed with her. This is completely contradicted in Zoey 102. Zoey 102 is a movie which was always going to face an uphill battle, and the movie tries its best to get over it, and succeeds in a lot of ways. It's visually appealing, brings back some of our favorite characters authentically, and hits the nostalgic part of our brains, which gives us some smiles and laughs. However, the movie has a broken understanding of the original, and what its audience wants. The movie's focus is off-center, and the time spent on unnecessary elements is disappointing. So, final thoughts. I think I'm glad this exists, but it's far from perfect, but it does beat expectations anyway. I love the original Zoey 101, and it's clearly a group of characters that deserved an ending. The director, Nancy Hauer, says her vision is to do another movie and eventually a series. However, this movie doesn't show confidence in her vision, but prove me wrong. I'll always tune in to the nostalgia. That's all for this review. Let me know if you want a more in-depth review, because there's a lot I didn't get into. Also, let me know what you thought of this movie, subscribe if you enjoyed, thanks for watching, and let me know what you want me to review next.